The warship hummed with the sound of alien engines as Commander Vex Ari walked through the long corridor toward the holding cells, his forelegs clicking against the metal floor with each step he took, and his mandibles twitched with a mixture of curiosity and disgust as he thought about the creature waiting for him behind those reinforced doors. 3 days ago, his fleet had destroyed the human frigate called Defiant in a battle that lasted less than 20 minutes. And from the wreckage, they had pulled only one survivor, a female human officer who had somehow managed to seal herself inside an escape pod before the ship exploded into a million pieces of burning metal. Her name was Lieutenant Elena Vasquez, according to the identification tags they found on her uniform, and she was now the property of the Corvani Dominion, whether she liked it or not. Vexari stopped in front of the cell and looked through the transparent barrier at his prisoner, and what he saw made him click his mandibles together in amusement. Human female sat in the corner of the small room, with her back against the wall and her knees pulled up to her chest, and her dark eyes stared at the floor as if she was looking at something very far away that only she could see. She had not spoken a single word since they brought her aboard. Pathetic, Vaxari said to his second-in-command, who stood beside him with the same look of contempt on his alien face. I expected more from the species that destroyed our colony on Veth Prime. His second-in-command laughed, and the sound was like rocks grinding together in his throat. Perhaps the stories about human ferocity were exaggerated. Commander, this one looks like she would break if I touched her with one claw. Inside the cell, Elena did not move, and she did not look up at the two aliens who mocked her from the other side of the barrier. But her ears caught every word they said, even though she pretended not to understand their language. The truth was that Elena understood everything. She had spent 6 years in military intelligence before transferring to active combat duty, and one of the many skills she had learned was how to listen without appearing to listen, how to watch without appearing to watch, and how to survive in situations where survival seemed impossible. Right now she was doing all three. Her eyes stayed fixed on the floor, but her mind was working faster than it had ever worked before. And she was counting footsteps in the corridor outside her cell, counting the seconds between guard rotations, counting the number of lights in the ceiling and the number of panels on the walls. She noticed that the power conduits ran behind the third panel from the left, because she could hear a faint electrical hum coming from that direction. And she noticed that the guards changed shifts every 4 hours because she had been tracking time by the rhythm of the ship's engines. Vexari pressed a button, and the barrier flickered off for a moment as he stepped inside the cell. And Elena felt her heart beat faster, but she forced herself to stay still and keep her eyes on the floor. Look at me, human, the commander demanded in a voice that expected obedience. Elena did not look up. Vexari grabbed her chin with his clawed hand and forced her head up until she had no choice but to meet his eyes. And what he saw in her gaze confused him. There was no fear there, no anger, no defiance, just an empty stare that seemed to look right through him. Are all humans this weak? He asked with genuine curiosity. We were told your kind fights to the death, even when there is no hope of victory. But you sit here like a broken animal. Elena said nothing, and her face showed nothing, and after a long moment, Vexari released her chin and stepped back with a sound of disgust. Perhaps you will find your voice when you stand before the High Council, he said as he walked out of the cell. They will want to question you about your fleet's movements and weapons capabilities. And I promise you, they have ways of making even the most silent prisoners talk. The barrier flickered back on, and Vexari walked away with his second-in-command, their laughter echoing through the corridor as they discussed how disappointing this human prisoner had turned out to be. Elena waited until she could no longer hear their footsteps before she allowed herself to take a deep breath. And then she went back to her work. She had already mapped the section of the ship visible from her cell window. And she knew there were at least 30 crew members who passed by her door during each shift cycle. And she knew that the guards carried weapons on their right hips, because they were all right-handed now. She added new information to her mental database. The commander was arrogant and liked to hear himself talk. His second-in-command followed orders without questioning them. And neither of them saw her as a threat. That was good. That was exactly what she wanted. Elena closed her eyes and began to organize everything she had learned into a mental map of the ship. And she placed markers in her mind for every detail that might be useful later. The location of the power conduits, the timing of the guard rotations, the direction the commander had come from, which probably meant the bridge was somewhere down that corridor. She did not know yet how she would escape from this ship. But she knew that she would find a way, because that was what humans did. They adapted, and they survived, and they never stopped fighting even when the fight seemed hopeless for. Now she would stay silent and let the aliens believe she was broken. And every hour that passed would give her more information to work with, more weaknesses to exploit, more opportunities to identify. The Corvani thought they had captured a helpless prisoner. They had no idea they had actually brought a predator into their home. Elena opened her eyes and looked at the panel, hiding the power conduits, and she allowed herself a small smile that disappeared as quickly as it came. She had work to do, and she had all the time in the world to do it, because the Corvani had already made their first mistake. They had underestimated a human, and Elena Vasquez was going to make them regret that mistake for the rest of their very short lives. On the 4th day of her captivity, the Corvani decided to show off their prize to the rest of the crew. And 2 guards came to Elena's cell early in the morning cycle with chains in their hands and cruel smiles on their alien faces. "Get up, human," the larger guard commanded as the barrier flickered off. The commander wants everyone to see what humanity's finest warriors look like in defeat. Elena stood slowly and held out her hands without being told. And the guards exchanged a look of surprise, because they had expected her to resist or at least show some sign of fear. Instead, she just stared at the floor with those empty eyes and waited for them to put the chains on her wrists. "This one really is broken," the smaller guard said with disappointment. "I was hoping she would fight back so I could teach her a lesson about Corvani strength." They led her out of the cell and into the main corridor of the ship. And Elena kept her head down as she walked between them, but her eyes were moving constantly beneath her lowered lashes, taking in every detail of the path they traveled. She counted 27 steps from her cell to the first intersection. And she noted that the left corridor led to what looked like an engineering section, because she could see crew members in different colored uniforms carrying tools. And the right corridor had heavier security, which probably meant it led to somewhere important like the armory or the bridge. The guards pushed her forward, and they walked through section after section of the massive warship. And everywhere they went, the Corvani crew stopped to stare and point and laugh at the pathetic human prisoner. Some of them shouted insults in their harsh language, and some of them pretended to lunge at her just to see if she would flinch. And when she showed no reaction at all, they laughed even harder and called her names that her translator could not fully convert into human words. Elena absorbed every insult without expression, but she was not thinking about the words. She was thinking about the layout of the ship that was slowly forming in her mind like a 3-dimensional puzzle. She noticed that the ship had 4 main levels, connected by lift tubes at regular intervals. And she noticed that the emergency bulkheads between sections were designed to close automatically during a crisis. And she noticed that the crew members who worked in engineering wore their identification badges on their left shoulders, while the security personnel wore theirs on their right. Every detail mattered. and every detail was stored away for later use. Guards brought her to the mess hall where hundreds of Kovanni crew members were eating their midday meal, and the room went quiet for a moment before erupting into laughter and jeers as word spread about. What they were looking at, Commander Vexari stood on a raised platform at the far end of the room with his senior officers, and he raised his clawed hand for silence before speaking in a voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "This is what the great human military sends against us," he said with mockery dripping from every word. A silent coward who cannot even look her captors in the eye. "Tell me, crew of the Dominion's Wrath, do you feel threatened by this creature?" The crowd roared with laughter, and someone threw a piece of food that hit Elena on the shoulder. And still she did not react. She just stood there with her head down and her hands bound in front of her, but inside her mind she was working faster than ever before. She had now seen the mess hall, which could hold approximately 300 crew members at once, and she had seen the 4 exits which were positioned at the corners of the room, and she had seen that the raised platform where the commander stood was directly beneath a ventilation shaft large enough for a human body to fit through. She looked at the guards around the room and counted 15 armed with rifles and 22 armed with sidearms, and she noted which ones stood with lazy posture and which ones kept their weapons in easy-to-grab holsters that were not properly secured. One guard near the east exit had fallen asleep, standing up with his eyes half closed, and another guard near the kitchen entrance had put his rifle down on a table so he could eat a piece of fruit. These were not professional soldiers. These were overconfident fools who had never faced a real threat on their own ship. Vex Ari jumped down from the platform and walked toward Elena with slow, deliberate steps, and the crowd parted to let him through as he approached his prisoner with that same look of contempt she had seen in his eyes since the first day. He stopped directly in front of her and grabbed her chin again, forcing her to look up at him, and this time he held her gaze for a long moment, as if searching for something hidden behind her eyes. "I almost feel sorry for you," he said quietly so only she could hear. "Your ship is destroyed, and your crew is dead, and your pathetic little species will soon learn what happens to those who challenge the Kovanni Dominion, but you will not live to see that day, because the High Council will execute you after they have extracted every secret from your weak human mind." Elena met his gaze and she let him see exactly what he expected to see: fear and defeat and hopelessness, and Vexari smiled with satisfaction as he released her chin and turned back to his cheering. "Crew, take her back to her cell," he ordered the guards. "We have shown everyone what humanity is truly worth." As the guards led her away, Elena allowed her eyes to pass over Commander Vexari one more time, and she noticed something interesting. The commander's personal quarters were marked by a special symbol on the door they passed on the way out, and that door was located directly next to the primary weapons control room. She also noticed that the door had no visible lock mechanism, which meant the commander was so confident in his own safety that he did not bother to secure his sleeping chamber. This was useful information. By the time they returned her to her cell, Elena had mapped approximately 60% of the ship in her mind, and she had identified 23 critical weaknesses that could be exploited by someone with the right knowledge and the right timing. The guards removed her chains and shoved her back into the corner, and they laughed at her one more time before activating the barrier and walking away. Elena sat in the silence of her cell and closed her eyes, and she began to plan. She thought about the engineering section and the exposed power conduit she had seen along the way, and she thought about the ventilation system that connected every part of the ship, and she thought about the lazy guards and the unlocked doors and the commander's arrogant belief that no single human could possibly pose a threat. They had shown her their ship because They wanted to humiliate her. Instead, they had given her exactly what she needed. Elena opened her eyes and looked at the ceiling of her cell, where a small ventilation grate sat waiting to be removed. And she smiled again, a real smile this time, cold and sharp like a blade being drawn from its sheath. The Kovani had no idea what was coming, but they would learn soon enough. On the 5th day, a new visitor came to Elena's cell, and this one was different from all the others who had come before. His name was Ambassador Kethra, and he was not a soldier. He was a scholar and a diplomat who had spent his life studying the many species that existed in the galaxy, and he had traveled all the way from the Kovani homeworld. When he heard that they had captured a live human specimen, Kethra was old for a Kovani, with gray patches on his scaled skin and a slight bend in his 4 legs that spoke of many years of walking through the halls of power. And when he looked at Elena through the transparent barrier, there was no hatred or contempt in his eyes, only curiosity. "Leave us," he said to the guards in a soft voice that somehow carried more authority than all of Commander Vashari's shouting. The guards hesitated, because they had orders to watch the prisoner at all times. But Kethra turned to look at them with those ancient eyes, and they quickly decided that arguing with an ambassador was not worth the trouble. They walked away, and Kethra waited until their footsteps faded before he pressed the button that lowered the barrier between himself and the human female. Lena watched him enter the cell with the same empty expression she had worn since her capture. But something inside her was alert and cautious, because this alien did not act like the others. Kethra pulled a small device from his robes and activated it, and a soft blue light flickered to life as the translation matrix began to work its magic on the space between them. "I know you can understand me," he said in a voice that was gentle and patient. "The translation matrix has been active since you came aboard this ship, and I have read the reports about how you react to certain words, even when you pretend not to hear them." Elena remained silent. Cora sat down on the floor across from her and folded his 4 legs beneath him in a gesture that seemed almost friendly. And he studied her face with the careful attention of someone who had spent a lifetime learning to read the expressions of alien species. "I am not like the others," he continued. "I do not wish to mock you or hurt you. I am simply curious about your kind, because humans are the most fascinating species I have ever encountered." Still, Elena said nothing, but her eyes moved to meet his for just a moment before returning to the floor. "Your species is young," Kethra said. "You have only been traveling among the stars for a few hundred years, while the Kovani have been a spacefaring civilization for thousands. And yet in that short time you have become one of the most feared races in the known galaxy. Why is that, I wonder?" He paused as if expecting an answer, and when none came, he leaned forward with genuine interest. "Is it your weapons?" "No. Your technology is not superior to ours. If anything, it is somewhat primitive by our standards. And yet you use it with a creativity that surprises us every time we face you in battle." Elena's fingers twitched slightly against her knee. "Is it your physical strength?" "No, you are fragile creatures compared to us. Your bones break easily, and your skin tears like paper. And yet you fight with a ferocity that makes even our bravest warriors hesitate." Kethra shook his head slowly, as if answering his own questions. "I have read every report about humanity that exists in our archives," he said. "I still cannot understand what makes your species so dangerous. Perhaps you can help me understand." The silence stretched between them like a living thing, and Kethra was about to speak again when Elena's lips moved for the first time since she had been brought aboard the ship. "You want to know what makes humans dangerous," she said in a voice that was quiet but clear. Kethra's eyes widened with surprise and delight, because he had finally broken through the wall of silence that had frustrated everyone else who had tried to. Communicate with this prisoner. Yes, he said eagerly. Please. Tell me. Elena lifted her head and looked directly at the ambassador with eyes that were no longer empty. They were sharp and cold and filled with something. That made Kethra feel a sudden chill run down his spine. I have been on this ship for 120 hours, she said slowly. And in that time I have learned everything I need to know about it. Kethra blinked in confusion. What do you mean? Your ship has 642 crew members, Elena said, in a flat tone that contained no emotion at all. 89 of them are currently off-duty and sleeping in their quarters on the lower decks. Your reactor core is shielded against external attacks, but it vents excess heat through Corridor 7 on Deck 4 every 18 minutes, creating a window of vulnerability that lasts approximately 45 seconds. The color drained from Kethra's face as she continued speaking. Your armory has a biometric lock that requires DNA verification from authorized personnel, Elena said. But the maintenance hatch beside it uses a simple mechanical seal that can be opened with any flat piece of metal. Your commander sleeps in quarters that are located directly next to the primary weapons control room. And he does not lock his door because he believes himself to be untouchable. How do you know these things? Kethra stammered. Elena's lips curved into a smile that contained no warmth at all. Your guards talk too loudly when they think no one is listening, she said. Your engineers complain about equipment problems where prisoners can hear them. Your commander enjoys showing off his ship to his crew, and he was kind enough to walk me through every section that I needed to see. Kethra scrambled backward until his back hit the wall of the cell, and his heart was pounding in his chest as he finally understood what he was looking at. You were never broken, he whispered. No, Elena agreed. I was watching. I was listening. I was mapping every corridor and counting every guard and identifying every weakness that your arrogant species left exposed for anyone with the patience to find them. She stood up slowly, and Kethra flinched even though she made no move toward him. You asked what makes humans dangerous, Elena said as she looked down at the terrified ambassador. The answer is simple. We pay attention and we never forget. And when the time comes to act, we do not hesitate. Kethra's hand moved toward the communication device on his belt. But Elena shook her head. You should probably warn them, she said with that same cold smile. But I do not think it will make any difference. I have been ready to move for 2 days now, and I was only waiting for a reason to begin. What reason? Kethra asked with a trembling voice. Lena's smile grew wider. Someone worth talking to. Before Kethra could react, she moved faster than he thought possible. And the last thing he saw before darkness took him was her hand reaching for the communication device on his belt. The silence that followed was broken only by the soft hum of the ship's engine sound. Then Elena Vasquez went to work. The attack began at the exact moment when the guard shifts changed. And that moment had been burned into Elena's memory through 5 days of careful observation. She moved through the ventilation shaft above her cell with the silence of a ghost. Her body pressed flat against the cold metal as she crawled toward the maintenance access points she had identified on her second day. Aboard the ship, the ambassador lay unconscious in her cell with the barrier reactivated. And it would be at least an hour before anyone came to check on him. An hour was more than enough time for what she had planned. Elena reached the access hatch and pressed her ear against the metal, listening for footsteps in the corridor below. And when she heard nothing, she pushed the hatch open and dropped down into the empty hallway with barely a sound. She was in Corridor 7 on Deck 4, the same corridor where the reactor vented its excess heat every 18 minutes, and she had approximately 12 minutes before the next cycle began. The engineering kit she had taken from Kethra's robes contained several useful tools. and she used the smallest one to remove the panel covering the power conduits that ran along the wall inside. She found exactly what she expected: a complex web of cables and circuits that powered everything from the lights to the life support systems, and she began to work with quick, precise movements that spoke of years of training. She did not cut any wires yet because that would trigger an alarm, but she loosened connections and rerouted power flows in ways that would cause problems later when she needed them to cause problems. Minutes later, she replaced the panel and continued moving down the corridor toward her next target. The armory was located on deck 3, and Elena used the lift tube during a gap in the guard rotation to reach it without being seen. She found the maintenance hatch exactly where she had expected it to be, a small metal door beside the heavily fortified entrance to the weapons storage area, and she used the flat edge of a tool to slide the simple mechanical lock open. Inside the maintenance room, she found spare parts and cleaning supplies, and a single access panel that led directly into the armory itself. Elena smiled as she pushed the panel open and slipped inside. The room was filled with weapons of every kind, rifles and pistols, and blades and explosive charges, and she took only what she needed, which was a single Corvani sidearm that fit comfortably in her hand, and 3 small explosive devices that she could attach to the charges she had already prepared. She also took a knife, because a knife was always useful. On her way out, she paused to look at the row of emergency environment suits hanging on the wall, and after a moment of thought, she grabbed one and stuffed it into a bag she found on a shelf. Then she disappeared back into the maintenance shaft and continued her silent journey through the ship. The next hour passed in a blur of movement and preparation. As Elena placed her charges in the location she had identified during her captivity, she put one in the power junction that controlled the lights on decks 2 through 4. She put one in the ventilation system near the bridge where it would release smoke and confusion when activated. She put one in the corridor outside Commander Vexari's quarters where it would seal him inside when the time came, and she put the last one near the heat venting system for the reactor, not close enough to cause a meltdown, but close enough to create a crisis that would demand the attention of every engineer on the ship. When everything was in place, Elena made her way to the communication hub on Deck 5, and she used Kethra's access codes to send a single encrypted message into space. Then she sat down in the shadows and waited for the chaos to begin. The first explosion was small and contained, designed to knock out the lights in 3 sections of the ship without causing any real damage. And the darkness that followed was filled with the sound of confused shouting and running feet. The second explosion released smoke into the ventilation system near the bridge, and the alarms that had been wailing through the ship suddenly grew louder as the crew realized they might be under attack. The third explosion sealed the corridor outside Commander Vexari's quarters, trapping him and his personal guards in a small section of the ship where they could do nothing but shout into their communication devices and demand status reports that no one could provide. And the fourth explosion, the one near the reactor, sent every engineer on the ship running toward Deck 4 in a desperate attempt to prevent what they thought was an imminent meltdown. Lena moved through the chaos like a blade through water, taking advantage of every moment of confusion to eliminate the obstacles in her path. The first guard she encountered was running toward the engineering section with his weapon drawn, and he never saw her step out of the shadows behind him. She wrapped her arm around his throat and squeezed until he stopped struggling. Then she took his rifle and continued moving. The second guard was smarter and saw her coming, but his surprise at seeing the human prisoner loose on the ship cost him the fastest half second he needed to raise his weapon. Elena shot him twice and stepped over his body without slowing down. By the time she reached deck 2, the ship was in complete disarray, with crew members running in every direction and officers screaming orders that no one followed. And Elena walked through it all with a calm that seemed almost supernatural. She killed 12 more guards on her way to the bridge, using the rifle when she had clear shots and the knife when she needed to be quiet. And each kill was quick and efficient because she had no time for anything else. The smoke in the corridor near the bridge was thick enough to hide her approach. And when she finally reached the doors that led to the command center, she stopped and took a deep breath. On the other side of those doors were the tactical officer and the navigation crew and all the senior staff who had laughed at her when she was paraded through the ship in chains. They had no idea she was coming. They had no idea that the silent, broken prisoner they had mocked was standing just meters away with a weapon in her hand and murder in her heart. Lena checked her rifle one more time and made sure the knife was secure at her belt. Then she pressed the button that opened the bridge doors and the real killing began. The bridge doors slid open with a soft hiss, and Elena stepped through the smoke into the command center of the Kovani warship. And every alien in the room turned to stare at her with expressions of disbelief frozen on their faces. She was covered in blood, some of it hers, but most of it belonging to the guards who had tried to stop her, and her dark eyes swept across the bridge with the cold calculation of a predator sizing up its prey. The tactical officer was the first to react, his hand reaching for the sidearm at his hip. But Elena was faster. She raised her rifle and fired 3 shots that sent him spinning backward into his console. "Nobody move," she said in a voice that cut through the chaos like a blade. 15 officers remained on the bridge, all of them reaching for weapons, all of them frozen in that moment between action and hesitation. And Elena used that moment to take 3 steps forward until she stood in the center of the room. "You have approximately 2 minutes before Commander Vexari breaks through the bulkhead I sealed behind him," she continued. "And I suggest you listen carefully to what I have to say." The navigation officer, a young Kurvani with fear in his eyes, spoke first. "How did you escape? How did you get past our security?" Elena almost laughed. "Your security? You mean the guards who talk about their patrol routes in front of prisoners? The engineers who complain about broken equipment where anyone can hear them? The commander who was so confident in his own superiority that he showed me every inch of this ship?" She shook her head slowly. "You did not have security. You had arrogance. And arrogance is not the same thing." One of the officers near the back of the room tried to inch toward an emergency panel, and Elena fired without looking. The shot missed him by centimeters and burned a hole in the wall beside his head. "I said nobody move." The officer froze with his hand still reaching toward the panel, and Elena returned her attention to the rest of the room. "I have placed charges throughout this ship," she said calmly. "One is attached to the reactor's heat venting system, and another is connected to the primary weapons array. If anyone tries to stop me or raise an alarm or do anything other than exactly what I tell them to do, I will destroy this ship and everyone on it. You would kill yourself too," the navigation officer said with a trembling voice. "Yes," Elena agreed. "I would. That is what makes this threat credible." The bridge fell silent as the reality of their situation became clear, and Elena could see the calculations happening behind their alien eyes as they weighed their options and found them. Wanting the sound of metal being torn apart echoed through the corridor behind her. And Elena knew that Vexari had almost broken through the bulkhead. She had less time than she thought. "Here is what is going to happen," she said quickly. "You are going to lower your weapons and move to the far side of the bridge. And you are going to stay there until my rescue arrives. My fleet received my message 20 minutes ago, and they are already on their way." "You are bluffing," One of the senior officers growled. No human fleet could reach us in time, Elena smiled. The human frigate Defiant was not traveling alone. There were 3 other ships in our convoy that escaped when you attacked us. And they have been following your fleet ever since, waiting for a signal that would tell them exactly where you are. She held up a small device that she had taken from the communication hub. I sent that signal an hour ago. The color drained from every face on the bridge as they realized what she was saying. They were not the hunters anymore. They were the prey, and help was not coming for them. The bulkhead behind Elena finally gave way with a tremendous crash, and Commander Vexari burst onto the bridge with his personal guards behind him. His eyes wild with rage and his weapon already raised. Kill her! He screamed, but his officers did not move. And when Vexari saw the expressions on their faces, he stopped and looked around the bridge with confusion. What is happening here? He demanded. Why are you all standing there? Shoot this human. Commander, the navigation officer said quietly. She has explosives attached to the reactor and the weapons array. If we attack her, she will destroy the ship. Vexari's mandibles clicked together as he processed this information. And then he laughed a harsh sound that contained no humor at all. Impossible, he said. This creature has been locked in a cell for 5 days. She could not have done any of this. Elena turned to face him with that same cold smile she had worn when she spoke to Ambassador Kethra. You are right that I was locked in a cell, she said. But I was not doing nothing in that cell. I was watching and listening and learning. And by the 3rd day, I knew more about this ship than half of your crew. She took a step toward him, and Vexari took a step back without realizing it. You mocked my silence. Elena continued. You thought I was broken because I did not speak or fight or cry, but I was not broken. Commander, I was working. Working on what? Vexari asked with genuine confusion. Elena's smile grew wider. I was mapping kill zones. Before Vexari could respond, alarms began to blare throughout the ship, and the tactical console lit up with warning signals. 3 human warships had just dropped out of hyperspace less than 10,000 kilometers away. Your fleet, Elena said calmly, has approximately 90 seconds to surrender before my ships open fire. I suggest you use that time wisely. The bridge erupted into chaos as officers rushed to their stations, and Vexari screamed orders that no one followed. And through it all, Elena stood in the center of the room with her weapon raised and her eyes fixed on the commander who had thought her pathetic in the end. It took less than 60 seconds for the Kovani to surrender. The human ships did not fire a single shot. 3 days later, Elena sat in the captain's chair of the Corvani warship, now a captured prize of the human Federation, and she watched through the view screen as escape pods carried the surviving crew toward a prison transport that would take them to a detention facility on the outer rim. Commander Vexari was among the prisoners, and Elena had made sure to wave at him as his pod launched from the ship. The story of what she had done spread quickly through both fleets, and soon every species in the galaxy would know about the human female who had captured an enemy warship using nothing but silence and patience and the arrogance of her captors. The Kovani would remember her for generations, and they would tell their children about the quiet human who had mapped their deaths while they laughed at her. They called her Kethvora in their language, which meant the quiet before thunder. But Elena did not care about names or stories or legends. She cared only about one thing: getting home. And now, finally, she could. Lieutenant Elena Vasquez stood up from the captain's chair and walked toward the exit with steady steps. And she did not look back at the bridge, where she had won her impossible victory. There would be other battles and other wars and other enemies who would underestimate humanity, and Elena would be ready for all of them, because that was what humans did. They survived, and they learned. And they never stopped fighting, not ever.